Yeah.
I thought you were downstairs still. I got confused. No, I know. I thought you were with me.
All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Take your Bible out to Isaiah 52. Pick up at the end of 52 this morning and get into 53. We on Wednesday night, we spent most of the class just really setting up Isaiah 53, a very well-known text about suffering, the servant of the Lord. At the end of 52 is really where this next section is introduced. That's why I want to start there. It says in verse 13, "Behold, my servant shall act wisely. He shall be high and lifted up, and shall be exalted. As many were astonished at you, his appearance was so marred beyond human semblance, and his form beyond that of the children of mankind. So shall he sprinkle many nations. Kings shall shut their mouths because of him. For that which has not been told them, they see, and that which they have not heard, they understand." So this is I think a fair summary of what the servant of the Lord is going to do, what he's going to accomplish. It is part of the news that is proclaimed. If you go back to verse 7 of 52, is where news is going to be shouted from the mountaintops. 53 begins with the question, though, who's believed what he's heard from us? Other translations use the phrase, who has believed our report? Fake news, right? Does anybody believe the news? That's what's happening here. The news is being reported. It's good news, very good news, but no one believes. And what this text does is it goes just to really describing in some detail the reaction and the response of the world to the Messiah. The other point that I made on Wednesday that is really I think the foundation of what you have described in chapter 53 is this idea of substitutionary atonement. And that's a big phrase, and you don't have to remember it. What you need to remember is the dynamic, because the dynamic means everything. All right? The suffering servant, what is described here is that he's our substitute. We can understand what a substitute is, that he is going to be in our place. So the suffering that he incurs is suffering in our place. This punishment that he's going to be given is punishment in our place. And the phrases that are related to this point are made throughout the chapter. And so it's a critical dynamic to recognize, because it emphasizes the fact, number one, that we are the ones who are responsible for his death. And it also makes the point that, well, there was no one else, nothing else, no one else who could do that, who could be put in that position. which brings us to the next idea of atonement, that He is the substitute atonement. And atonement is reparation for a wrong or an injury. And we spent a good little while talking about this, and if you probably wondered, maybe you've even had someone ask the question, well, why did Jesus have to die? And it seems like such a horrible, it was such a horrible thing. Couldn't God have done it another way? Like I said on Wednesday, couldn't God just have snapped His fingers? And we talked about, well, no, that He couldn't have done it another way, and there's a reason why. The point, basically, is that when a wrong occurs, when there's an injury, when damage has been done, somebody's got to pay. And we know that. We understand that in all kinds of different contexts in everyday life. And you can make this point in a more impactful way in terms of the point that the Bible makes is that when sin is committed, when that's the injury that has been incurred, when sin happens, someone's got to die. Something has to die. And you can look narrowly at the law of Moses, where it was an animal that had to die, whose blood had to be shed because of what I did. I wasn't the one dying; the animal is going to die. We can build on that and how the animals could not be this substitute atonement, that they're not atoning for anything. Ultimately, the atonement is going to come at the cross of Christ. So at His cross, I try to point out there's really three things that happen at His cross. Number one is that righteousness is exonerated. So does God care about sin? Well, at the cross it says that He does, because He exonerates righteousness. Unrighteousness, sin is destroyed. Sin is destroyed, righteousness is exonerated, and then the human family is able to be reconstituted, reshaped, remade. And that's very much gets to things that are described here in Isaiah, with the human family is going to be reformed. Who's Israel? We say Israel, the biological descendants of Abraham, and that's not it. That's true for a time, but what this new thing that God is doing is that the family is going to get bigger. It's going to enlarge it. That's chapter 4. But this idea of substitutionary atonement is very basic in understanding what happened at the cross and why that way. Just know that when wrong is committed, somebody has to pay. We talked about somebody took a baseball bat to your car. You're not going to just let it go, right? Somebody's responsible. Either somebody else is going to pay or you're going to pay. It's just it's the natural order of things. So here in this chapter, there's four things that we see. Number one, there's suffering. There's suffering, and that suffering is described in some detail. You also find silence. Silence by the suffering servant of the Lord. And that's a point that is emphasized. There's silence. There's rejection. Rejection is described here. Here's the overall reaction to the servant of the Lord. And it's surprising because the servant of the Lord is doing the will of God, and it's overwhelmingly good and positive. It's going to bless the lives of humanity, but there's rejection. It doesn't make any sense. But that's what's going to happen. And then at the end of the chapter, it describes vindication. Vindication. In terms of what God thinks of the suffering servant and what He thinks of those who will trust in Him. So there's vindication there. So that's kind of, I think, a helpful way, at least, to summarize what's going on here in the chapter. Anything about substitutionary atonement? Are these four summary points of the chapter? I did that good, huh? Okay. believed the news? Who's believed the news? Now, if you read this text as a whole, which is rarely ever done, if you start in chapter 40, which is where this section begins, 40 to the end of the book, I've told you that, Handel's Messiah is about trying to bring this whole thing together so we can get the overall point, the dynamic that's described here. This is going to create some tension. This is going to create some pause. It's going to get the listener to think. Here God is describing, we're going to do some great thing, but then there's this question that comes out of nowhere. But who believed our report? And to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? Well, then you'd want to go to verse 2. Tell me more. There's such a change and shift in dynamic is the point I'm trying to make. So the question of who believes our report, it anticipates contradiction of the suffering Messiah. The suffering Messiah is a contradiction in the minds of the people who hear the news. Why?
He's God.
He's God.
That's not what they expected or wanted.
Not what they expected or wanted. Yeah, all of that's correct.
Like, how can somebody who's suffering and weak be the Savior?
How is somebody who's suffering and weak be the Savior? Yeah. There is a very clear image in their mind, just as we have a clear image in our mind about a leader, what a leader is supposed to look like, sound like, act like. So Isaiah he's anticipating that, yes, this isn't going to make sense.
This is not the way of man would have him come.
Right. This is not the way a man would have him come. Absolutely. And it also points out that the overall rejection of the Messiah is based on the fact that he did suffer. So, if we move forward in time to Paul in Galatia, teaching the gospel in Galatia, dealing with people who want to hang on to the old law. Why did they want to do that? He points out that the reason you did that is because you didn't, even in the law it said, cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. Cursed is everyone that hangs on a tree. And that's what the cross was. That's what the cross was. So as far as they were concerned, they even had, we would say, maybe a scriptural basis for their rejection. See, it says that cursed is everyone who hangs on a tree. It's the suffering. That made it so clear and obvious that the Messiah is not Jesus of Nazareth. What is not understood and what we struggle to understand. This is still the same problem today. Maybe more of our problems and rejection are based around the resurrection. This text is not dealing with the resurrection; it's dealing with his death. But what this text is trying to do is not just saying, yeah, the servant of the Lord is going to die, but he's trying to explain to us the meaning of his death. The meaning of his death. And so, I would suggest to you that's what was not understood by Israel. They don't understand the meaning of his death. That's why I said at the beginning, the cross, it accomplishes three things. It destroys sin, it exonerates righteousness, and it reconstitutes the human family. Well, how? How does it do that? Well, read the New Testament. That's what is explained, what the news means. Well, what is his death about? Why did it have to be that way? So, the point is going to be made that God's power is revealed by weakness. That's counterintuitive. But that's a consistent pattern over time. Is that God's power is is shown through weakness, that out of weakness, God can accomplish anything He wants. Cindy?
I was just thinking, I mean, in the past, present, and future, it's who's going to believe that God continually keeps trying to love and help His people. He showed them the power. They didn't believe He was God with the power. So now, as you said, He's showing them in weakness and what that means. So, I mean, compared to any other God tried to communicate with His creation, to tell them what's up about.
Yeah. So, he's going to describe this. He's going to describe that weakness and what that weakness ultimately is going to look like and involve. But who's believed the news? Isaiah. The question just anticipates this reaction, and even as the expression has been used several times about how God's ways are not our ways. God doesn't think like we think. That certainly is shown in the suffering of the Messiah. So in verse 2 it says, For he grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. Have we heard that before? Okay. Yeah. Yes, we have heard that before. We have. That's how, in the first section of the book, one of the ways that the Messiah is described. This shoot is going to spring up from a burned stump. That doesn't sound like anything that's strong. You know, you've all seen a shoot come up from a stump, I'm sure. And it's you know, if anything, it's a nuisance. But it certainly is not the image of strength. It's describes something that's quite vulnerable. But that's how this text begins. He grew up before him like a young plant, like a root out of dry ground. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. What does it mean that he had no form or majesty that we should look at him?
He didn't stand out in the crowd.
Doesn't stand out in a crowd?
He was no Saul.
He was no Saul. Yeah. You think of Saul's the first king of Israel, and, you know, Saul is the stereotype of a leader, isn't he? I mean, he's described that way. This man who was a head and shoulders taller than everybody else. He stood out in the crowd.
He's what the people wanted.
He's what the people wanted. Yes, he looks like the image that we have in our mind of a leader. He's strong. And just the opposite is described here. I don't know if you've ever looked at this. There's a lot of research that's been done. It's kind of interesting if you want to go down the rabbit hole of physical appearance and physical traits of our presidents. It's kind of a fun thing to do. And there's, especially in the modern era, you know, there's some trends that we kind of lean to. And it's interesting how many of our leaders, they are a reflection of what we think a leader is supposed to look like and sound like. Something totally different is going on here with what the Messiah is going to be like. The idea of majesty, I think, is significant. Another piece of this is in terms of this root. This root is applied later to describe the dynasty of David. So the root is a royal line. It is a royal root. Well, you know, by the time Jesus comes into the world, that royal family is all but forgotten, right? Long gone, ancient history, and that's how we would describe the time that passes between David and Jesus. Ancient history. So there's royalty there, but in terms of royalty, he doesn't look royal. He doesn't look like a king. Not at any point in his ministry. Maybe you think, well, in time, you know, he'll start a movement and accumulate power and wealth, and he will be presented as a powerful king. And that never happens. As a matter of fact, just the opposite. There's in John 6, you remember when the crowds, they want to make him their king. And he wants nothing at all to do with that. And so he just disappears. He's going to be their king, but a different kind of king. And Isaiah describes a different kind of king. Verse 3, it says, he was despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Now maybe we could understand, based on what's said in verse 2, why he would be despised and rejected of men already. Because he doesn't look like a king. Doesn't look strong and powerful. Doesn't look like somebody who would really be able to accomplish anything for us. And when you take into consideration the fact that what they wanted their king to accomplish, that's a totally different story, right? They wanted their king to accomplish, they wanted a revolution. They wanted their king to lead a revolution against the Romans so that they could have independence nationally. That's what they wanted. And what's described in this text doesn't speak a word about that. It's a different kind of liberation that's coming. This king is coming to set people free from sin, and that's what his mission's about. And so, when you read his ministry and that people they're looking for a king, or James and John are looking to be at the left and right hand of the king, we can understand what they're thinking. They're thinking in political terms. They're thinking how people think in terms of power. Power is redefined by Jesus. There's power, but it's given a new definition. It is not used to oppress, but it's used to serve. It's used to serve. And that's what he's doing in Isaiah 53. He's going to serve by his suffering. So he's a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. You think of the song we sing, Man of Sorrows. What a name. What a name. We've talked about how names had some significance in this text earlier in Isaiah. But a man of sorrows, it's getting into his character, it's getting into his purpose. And so is one from whom men hide their faces. He was despised and we esteemed it not. What does it mean that men hide their faces? Have you ever hid your face from somebody? I know
Kids do that.
Kids do that? How do kids do that?
When they're in trouble, they can,
Yeah?
or try to talk to someone who's maybe not living like they should. They'll kind of dodge you, or not return calls, or avoid you.
Kind of evasive. That's one way. How else do we hide our faces?
Just look away.
Look away? Look away. You ever been out and you see somebody that, I hope they didn't see me. I don't want to talk to that person. No, you never. You never, right? That's what's described here. It is one from whom men hid their faces. And they're embarrassed by it. They're embarrassed by it. And that's, going back to John 6, that's exactly what happens. It's a transition in Jesus' ministry in John 6. When he does not give the people what they want, they turn away from him, never to return. Some of the saddest words you'll find Jesus saying is when he looks to Peter and says, will you also go away? It's an example of how people they don't want to be seen with him. They don't want to be associated with him. In verse 4, 4-9 starts describing how no one understood what they were doing by rejecting. They just don't know. And, I think of Paul, what he says. Paul sure didn't understand. Paul said, had the kings of the earth known what they were doing, they wouldn't have crucified the Lord of glory. If they really understood, they wouldn't have. This would have happened a very, very different way. So no one understands. an understanding of his death. What does that take? Now, what did it take to bring about an understanding of his death? I mean, you say, well, Isaiah was written hundreds and hundreds of years before. What did it take? Well, it took God raising Jesus from the dead. It took the Spirit moving in Acts 2. And it took a confrontation by the resurrected Lord with Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus. That's what it took. It should bring some insight to what Jesus told Peter when Peter gave the right answer of who he was. He says, heaven revealed that. He says, flesh and blood didn't reveal that. Heaven revealed that. And the only reason we know anything about anything related to God and what He's done for us is through heaven revealing it. It's not through discovery. If it's left to discovery, we don't have a chance. We are hopeless. Had the kings of the earth known what they were doing, they wouldn't have killed the Lord of glory. This text is anticipating all of that. So verse 4, it says that, surely He's borne our griefs and carried our sorrows. Here's the first indication of Him suffering in our place. Our sorrows, our griefs. You say, where do they stem from? Sorrow and grief ultimately stem from sin. Sin brings decay, breakdown, and it culminates in death. My sorrow and my grief is either related to what has happened to somebody else or what has happened to me. What has been caused by someone else or what has been caused by me. But it all can be traced back to sin. Think of all the collective sorrow and grief and sorrow in this world. It says that He bears all of that. So again, it's introducing us to the idea that He's suffering for the sins of the world. Because that's where you can trace it. He says, yet we esteemed Him stricken, smitten by God and afflicted. Again, this is the idea of, well, here He is, and He is sentenced to death. He's crucified. He ain't the Messiah. He's not the one we're looking for. He's not the one Isaiah had said was coming. But in verse 5 it says that He was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon Him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with His wounds we are healed. Nothing positive is said about us. Nothing positive is said about the reaction of people in this text. Yes, we have sorrow. Yes, we have grief. He carries it, and yet we decided He's been stricken by God. God is punishing Him for what He's done. There's no sense of He's dying there for our griefs and sorrows. It's something that He has done. The text says, no, that He's pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. Upon Him was the chastisement that brought us peace. Again, chastisement that brings peace. This gets back to the idea of atonement. When a wrong has been done, someone has to pay. If we're in a state of hostility, someone has to pay the ransom price to make peace. The Apostle Paul, what does he say in Ephesians chapter 2? That is by His blood, by the blood of His cross, we are brought near. He is our peace. Jesus is our peace, is what is stated in Ephesians chapter 2. That's being anticipated here in this text. But what it does say, what it concludes with, despite this horrible, wrong reaction and assessment of the servant of the Lord, it says that by His stripes we are healed. I mean, if all we had was verses 4 and 5, we could conclude that we don't deserve healing. Who deserves healing? Whoever the text is about, those people don't deserve healing. But that's the result of his suffering. This is how God is going to make things right. This is how he's going to save humanity, through the suffering of his servant. In verse 6, though, it says, all we like sheep are gone astray. We've turned everyone to his own way, and the Lord has laid on him the iniquity of us all. The description of we're like sheep. How are we like sheep?
You don't follow the shepherd.
Say that again?
Follow the shepherd.
Follow the shepherd. How are humans like sheep? Not real smart. What do we think we are, though, don't we?
We don't know where to go.
Don't know where to go.
Or do, or anything. Kind of like the next one, we have all turned our own way. They'll just wander.
Yeah. Wander aimlessly. No direction. Of all of the ways we would describe ourselves, sheep probably doesn't make our list. Some would pride themselves on being wolves. There's two kinds of people in the world, right? There's sheep and there's wolves. And sheep are weak. They're helpless. They're not very smart, and they're entirely dependent on the shepherd for everything. And so we really have to take some time to try to appreciate how we as humans are characterized here. We're like sheep, and everybody's turned to his own way. There's just no direction. If we think about what happened among Jesus' followers at his crucifixion, what happened? Where did they go? They scattered. That's the term that's used. They scattered. That's not an accidental term that's used there. Sheep scatter. And that's what happens with the disciples. They scatter. They go away, turning to his own way. Well, if sheep are left to themselves, they can't protect themselves. They cannot find food for themselves. That's the shepherd gives security to the sheep and leads them to food, leads them to pasture. Why? Because sheep will just starve to death if you just place them in somewhere. If they stray, when they stray, if they're going to go their own way, they're going to stray, and then they're going to get caught in a bad place. If sheep, if they get turned on their back, they can't even right themselves. They will kick and baa and whatever else they do. And one of two things is going to happen, right? One of two things is going to happen. Either a predator is going to come along and get them, or they're just going to lay there and starve to death. Unless the shepherd comes along and rights them. And so he says, we're like sheep. And in quite a helpless condition here. And the Lord, though, laid on him the iniquity of us all. So again, we're the ones who are lawless. That's what that word iniquity means, lawless. God has a law. God has had a law as long as he gave breath to humans. And, when we turn our own way away from him, then we violate that. That's more of a legal term that's used. But the point is the lawlessness. If there's lawlessness, then there needs to be a penalty, right? That's part of the purpose of a law. If you break the law, you violate it, and we know what the penalty for that particular infraction is supposed to be. Isaiah says that the penalty is all put on the suffering servant. Verse 7 says, he was oppressed, he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. Like a lamb that is led to the slaughter, and like a sheep that is before its shearer is silent, so he opened not his mouth. We wouldn't doubt when you read about what happens to Jesus, oppression and affliction, are accurate words to describe what he endured. And we would probably think about this verse in terms of him being arrested, brought before the kangaroo courts, scourged, paraded through the streets, and then suspended between heaven and earth on a cross. This is that he doesn't resist it. He doesn't resist it. That's not how people typically react to oppression and affliction. If anything, we're going to go kicking and screaming. And that's not what happens here. I mean, it's been brought up a couple times in this study when you think of this trial that he says very little. He says very little. Now, the little that he says is profound, but it certainly doesn't sound like some ardent defense. Even when he's praying, in the garden, not wanting to go through, not wanting to experience what was before him. He ends each expression with "Not my will, but your will be done." So he's consigned to his suffering. Doesn't want to experience it, but he knew what it was going to accomplish. He had the understanding that everyone else lacked. Verse 8 says, "By oppression and judgment he was taken away. And as for his generation, who considered that he was cut off out of the land of the living and stricken for the transgression of my people." So here in verse 8, it gets back to the reaction. The generation, there's no one there to make a defense for him. No one stands up for him. They just figured that justice was being done, and that he was not who he said that he was. Verse 9 says, and they made his grave with the wicked and with the rich man in his death, although he had done no violence, and there was no deceit in his mouth. So, in the aftermath of the cross, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus come to bury him. And Joseph of Arimathea, of course, was a very wealthy man. And it would appear that Nicodemus was as well. And that family tomb of Joseph of Arimathea is where he was laid. And that seems to fit what was described here. There seems to be some recognition by these two men about the injustice of what was happening. That, the progression of Nicodemus is fascinating. I'm sure his progression of faith that's described very briefly in the Gospel of John. But there's just he's done no violence. There's no deceit in his mouth. So he's not. It's emphasizing the point that he's not deserving of this. He was not he wasn't some fast talking salesman who was trying to pull the wool over people's eyes. The guile or deceit being in his mouth. Maybe somebody who was, as there were others who'd come along long before Jesus, and even some who come after him, claiming to be the Messiah, and that's kind of what many of them were. Yes.
So it's for us too. That Jesus was very honest in his ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And what he did on the cross, there's no ulterior motive for this. It's not like, well, I'll do this because I'm going to get some side benefit for it.
Yeah.
we can be confident that he did it for the reason that Isaiah is presenting here and that is given later. He's doing it for us, for our sins. It's, it's like, he's not getting endorsed for it. There's no deal, something special that he's getting out of it. There's no reason he should have done it at all.
Yeah.
And yet he was willing to go all the way down to this, this terrible level to carry us out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Great point. It shows the honesty, the selflessness of what he's doing. Verse 10 says, "Yet it was the will of the Lord to crush him. He's put into grief. When his soul makes an offering for guilt, he shall see his offspring. He shall prolong his days. The will of the Lord shall prosper in his hand. Out of the anguish of his soul he shall see and be satisfied. By his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteous, and he shall bear their iniquities. Therefore I will divide him a portion with the many, and he shall divide the spoil with the strong, because he poured out his soul unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors. Yet he bore the sins of many, and made intercession for the transgressors." So the 10 to 12 here are describing really the effect of his death. By his suffering, many would be made righteous. Many would be made righteous. And that's for the fact that his suffering was a sufficient atonement. The price was paid. The price was satisfied for our sins. It makes the point that his soul is being made as an offering for the guilt of our sins. So he's doing that. He's doing this to save our souls, which we struggle to understand what our souls are and the eternal nature of our souls. But that's what he's seeking to save by the giving of his life. Verse 11, this idea of by his knowledge shall the righteous one, my servant, make many to be accounted righteousness, and he shall bear their iniquities. I would suggest to you that verse is anticipating, the news that's going to be proclaimed. Right? The gospel is news. The gospel is about the death and resurrection of Jesus. What does it mean? Well, Isaiah is showing it. It means that we can be made righteous. But you have to believe the news. Right? If you don't believe the news, then you can't be made righteous. If you think, well, I'm a good person, I know I've got some problems, but I'm working on them and I'm going to be better. That's not going to be enough. It's not going to be enough. And you probably will come to understand that yourself, right? We try to make up for the wrong that we've done. But in doing that, we realize, when we lie awake at night because we can't sleep because of guilt, we know that no matter what we do, how hard we try, it's never enough. It's never enough. The sooner we realize that, it will never be enough, then the sooner we will start to look to Jesus, because it is through his sacrifice that he makes us righteousness. His sacrifice is enough. It's more than enough to forgive our sins, to alleviate the burden of guilt that we struggle with. But it's all for nothing unless we believe that. And for some, because they've believed the lie for so long that they can make up for their wrong themselves, it can be just too much to believe. Just can't believe that. And yet here's this wonderful blessing that we need most in our lives, and it says, if you believe that, you can be saved. That's where Paul begins. How's the righteousness of God placed upon us? How do you receive that? You receive it through faith. What is faith? Faith is a believing loyalty in what God did for us through Jesus. And so that means, verse 12, that there's an inheritance. He'll divide the spoil with the strong, because he's poured his soul unto death and was numbered with the transgressors. You know, the king's going to share. To use an expression, he's going to share the spoils of war. We're going to enjoy his victory. And Paul writes about victory, right, in 1 Corinthians 15. In light of what God accomplished, the resurrection of Jesus, the victory has been won, and we can share in it if we believe, if we remain steadfast and unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord. So it's we cannot overstate what was described here in Isaiah 53. What follows is a description of, well, the consequence of this. What does it mean that the servant of the Lord was going to suffer like this to bring many souls to the righteousness of God? So we'll pick up in 54 on Wednesday. Anything you'd like to mention? You got like 15 seconds. All right. Well, thanks for coming.
Got that settled in, everything all unpacked and all.
Yeah, for the most part.
Well, that's good. It's always a big hassle about moving. Packing and moving.
Yeah.
Thing gets so disrupted.
Yeah, we're in pretty good shape.
He used that verse, you know, when like when he like he was like prepared, like when he was prepared, you know, like that little thing, you know, like that.